In a town where everyone knew your name, and every sunset looked the same, 16-year-old Heather Rich stood out. She wasn't famous. She wasn't trying to be. But there was something about her, a spark, that made people remember her smile, her laugh, her kindness. Before we dive into this heartbreaking story, make sure you subscribe to this channel and stay tuned, because what began as an ordinary October evening in 1996 would soon unravel into one of the most haunting cases ever to cross the Oklahoma-Texas border. Waurika, Oklahoma. A tiny dot on the map, about 2 hours southwest of Oklahoma City. Population, just over 2,000. A place where Friday nights revolved around football, the Dairy Queen parking lot was a social hub, and everyone's parents had gone to school together. Life here felt simple, predictable, safe. But for Heather, it was a place that felt both comforting and confining. She dreamed big, beyond these open fields and two-lane highways. Heather Rich was born in 1980. Friends described her as bright, funny, and genuine, the kind of person who could walk into a room and make it warmer just by being there. She loved country music, horses, and the wide-open skies of her hometown. She was also headstrong, emotional, and curious about the world, all the things that made her 16 and full of life. But like many teenagers growing up in small towns, she was torn between two worlds, the comfort of what she knew, and the pull of what she wanted to discover. Heather's friends say she had a rebellious streak. Not dangerous, just restless. She liked hanging out with older friends, driving around with music blasting, talking about life, dreams, and boys. To most, she was just another small-town girl. But to those who really knew her, Heather had that energy, that spark, of someone who wanted more. She wanted to make something of her life. Her mother, Gail, later said Heather had a strong will, sometimes stubborn, sometimes sweet. One moment she'd be helping her mom with chores. The next, she'd be arguing about curfew, slamming the door, and then 5 minutes later coming back to apologize. She was a teenager, trying to figure herself out. And like many kids that age, Heather found herself at that fragile crossroads between innocence and independence. But let's pause for a moment and imagine the world Heather lived in back then, 1996. No smartphones. No social media. Just landlines, handwritten notes, and Friday night bonfires. In small towns like Waurika, friendships meant everything. Words spread fast, and secrets didn't stay hidden for long. But for Heather, those friendships were her whole world. She had a tight group of friends, cheerleaders, athletes, kids she'd known since grade school. They'd gather after school at the local gas station, share milkshakes, talk about crushes, college plans, and the future. Heather's smile was infectious. People remembered how she lit up when she talked about becoming a nurse or maybe a veterinarian. She loved helping people. She loved animals. Her heart was open, trusting, and full of dreams, maybe too trusting. Waurika wasn't the kind of place where people locked their doors. Most kids felt safe walking home late at night. Parents didn't imagine danger lurking nearby. But underneath that sense of security, there were cracks, the quiet undercurrents of teenage drama, jealousy, and bad decisions that sometimes spiral in ways no one expects. Heather was growing up. Testing limits. Falling in and out of young love. And somewhere in that mix, she began to cross paths with a different crowd, boys a little older, rougher, with their own struggles and secrets. No one could have guessed how much that shift would change everything. It's easy, in hindsight, to connect the dots. To look back and see where things went wrong. But for Heather, it was just life happening, fast, confusing, emotional. Her friends later said she had been grounded not long before that fateful October night. She was trying to prove she was responsible, that she could make her own choices. But being 16 means balancing the line between trust and temptation. She wrote notes to friends, doodled hearts in her notebooks, and talked about wanting to graduate, to travel, maybe even move somewhere bigger. Every day, she walked through the halls of Waurika High School, just another teenager, laughing with friends, sharing secrets by her locker, completely unaware that the moments she was living would one day be frozen in time. When you look at her photos now, it's hard not to feel the weight of what's coming. But in that fall of 1996, Heather had no reason to think her world was about to change. October in Waurika meant cooler nights, homecoming games, and the scent of hay drifting through the air. It was the kind of place where everyone waved when they passed on the road, where every truck that drove by was recognized by sound. Heather's days were filled with routine: school, cheer practice, chores, phone calls with friends. She just started dating again after a breakup, trying to find her balance between friendship and romance. Nothing about her life seemed dangerous. Nothing at all. But stories like Heather's remind us how fragile that sense of safety really is. How a single night, a single decision, can shift everything forever. As the sun set on October 2, 1996, Heather had no idea that she was being watched. No idea that people she considered friends would soon betray her trust in the most devastating way imaginable. Before tragedy struck, she was just a 16-year-old girl dreaming of tomorrow, maybe thinking about prom, maybe worrying about grades, maybe wondering who she'd become. But in small towns, everyone's stories intertwine. And sometimes, innocence and danger walk side by side, unnoticed until it's too late. Heather's story isn't just about what happened to her. It's about how quickly life can change. It's about choices, trust, and the illusion of safety in places that feel too familiar to fear. As we remember Heather, the laughter, the light, the dreams she carried, we also look closer at how that light was stolen, and why the truth took so long to come to the surface. Stay tuned, as we uncover what really happened on that quiet October night, and how 3 teenage boys turned a small-town friendship into an unthinkable crime. Every tragedy starts somewhere, a moment so ordinary you'd never think to remember it. For 16-year-old Heather Rich, that moment began on a cool October night in 1996. It was supposed to be just another drive, another night out with friends. But within hours, the calm of Waurika, Oklahoma, would shatter forever. Before we begin, make sure you're subscribed, because what you're about to hear isn't a ghost story or an urban legend. It's real. And it changed 3 towns, 3 families, and 1 quiet border forever. October 2, 1996. The night was clear, almost calm. A full moon hung over Jefferson County, bathing the land in pale silver light. Inside a modest home near Waurika Lake, Heather Rich sat in her room, restless. She'd had an argument with her mom earlier that evening, the kind of typical teenage friction that comes and goes. Heather wanted freedom. Independence. To prove she could make her own choices. Her mother thought she was asleep. The house was quiet. The clock ticked past 10. But Heather wasn't sleeping. She was thinking. Wondering. Somewhere down a gravel road, a car engine turned over. Inside that car were 3 teenage boys, Joshua Bagwell, Curtis Gamble, and Randy Wood. They were young, 17, 18, part of the same tight circle that orbited Waurika High. They played sports, hunted, hung out near the lake. On the surface, they were normal small-town kids. But beneath the jokes and bravado, there was tension. They'd been drinking earlier. There were rumors. Jealousy. Ego. Heather had known at least 2 of them, casually. She'd dated one for a short time. The others were familiar faces. That night, one of them convinced her to sneak out. Just for a drive. Just to talk. She slipped out the back door quietly, careful not to wake her family. The air was cool, carrying the scent of cut hay and dust. She walked toward the headlights waiting down the road. For Heather, this wasn't rebellion, it was trust. She thought she was meeting friends. But as the door of that car closed behind her, something in the night shifted. The car moved along back roads near the Texas border, narrow, winding stretches of gravel that locals knew by heart. Inside, the boys were laughing, music playing loud, masking the unease building in Heather's voice. Witnesses later said she looked anxious, quiet, maybe confused. Somewhere between Waurika and the Red River, the conversation turned sharp. Maybe it was jealousy. Maybe peer pressure. Maybe something darker that had been brewing for weeks. Whatever it was, Heather suddenly found herself surrounded by people she thought she could trust, but who no longer saw her as a friend. The sound of tires crunching gravel echoed through the night. That same stretch of road would later become infamous, the path that led to the unthinkable. It was close to midnight when they stopped. The laughter was gone. The air felt heavier. What happened next would become the heart of the investigation, the part everyone would argue about for years. Who said what? Who crossed the line first? Who decided there was no turning back? All anyone knows for sure is that the tone changed. Heather wanted to go home. Someone said no. The car door slammed. Then another. In that silence, everything shifted from teenage mischief to something irreversible. The boys would later give conflicting stories, blaming each other, minimizing, twisting the timeline. But every version began the same way: that car ride. That lonely road. That split-second decision to stop. Heather's last moments of safety had already passed. The Oklahoma-Texas border isn't marked by fences or lights, just winding dirt trails and shallow banks where the water glows faintly under the moon. It's quiet there. Remote. The kind of place where no one hears a car stop. That's where they took her. Heather didn't fight at first, she trusted them. But when fear set in, when she realized what was happening, the night turned violent. The details of that violence are difficult to speak aloud, but what matters is this: her pleas were ignored. And when it was over, when the night was heavy with silence again, the boys panicked. They were teenagers, terrified of what they'd done, but too deep to turn back. So they made a choice, the choice that would haunt them, and an entire community, forever. A gun was raised. 3 shots shattered the stillness. The echo rolled across the borderlands, fading into the Texas wind. Afterward they drove in silence. The same car that had carried laughter an hour earlier was now heavy with dread. No one spoke. No one dared. The boys tossed their weapons, their clothes, their fear into the night, thinking they could bury it all beneath the weight of denial. They believed the river would hide their crime. That the border between states would hide the truth. But the border didn't erase the evidence. It only complicated it. Back in Waurika, Heather's mother woke up around 1 a.m. The house was quiet. Her daughter's bed was empty. She thought maybe Heather had gone to a friend's house, or had fallen asleep somewhere safe. But deep down, something felt wrong. That mother's instinct, the one that tells you when something is off, whispered the truth before anyone else knew it. By morning, the town of Waurika stirred awake. Kids headed to school. Farmers opened their barns. The world looked the same. But Heather Rich was missing. Calls were made. Friends questioned. Rumors spread fast. Someone had seen her getting into a car. Someone else heard arguing near the lake. In a town that size, news travels like wildfire, but answers come slow. For her friends, confusion turned to fear. For her family, fear turned to dread. The boys, the same ones laughing hours earlier, acted normal. They went to class. They talked to friends. They smiled. But beneath that calm, guilt was already cracking their facades. Someone knew. Someone couldn't sleep. And soon someone would talk. If part 1 was the calm before the storm, this night was the moment the storm touched ground. Heather's disappearance would ignite one of the most shocking investigations in Oklahoma-Texas history. But on that night, before police cars and search parties and headlines, there was only silence. 3 boys driving home. 1 girl gone. And a town still unaware that everything had just changed. That road still exists today, winding, quiet, almost peaceful. People drive it without realizing the weight it carries. Because sometimes the most terrifying stories aren't told in screams or shadows. They're whispered in the places we think are safe. Heather Rich trusted the wrong people that night. And the world she knew, her school, her friends, her family, would never be the same again. In part 3, we follow the aftermath, how a mother's search for truth exposed the unthinkable, and how justice began in the most unlikely place. Stay with us. Trust is fragile. It takes years to build, and a single moment to destroy. For 16-year-old Heather Rich, that moment came in the dead of night, when friendship twisted into cruelty, and loyalty shattered beyond repair. Before we begin, make sure you're subscribed. Because what happened next, on that lonely stretch of land between Oklahoma and Texas, isn't just a story of violence. It's a story of betrayal, cowardice, and choices that can never be undone. The laughter from earlier was gone. The air inside the car grew heavy, tense, unspoken. Heather sat quietly in the back seat, realizing something was wrong. Joshua Bagwell was behind the wheel. Curtis Gamble sat beside him. In the back, Randy Wood, the youngest, tried to act calm, but the silence between them was loud. No one was smiling anymore. The car rolled deeper into the backroads near Belknap Creek, far from any light or sound. It was the kind of darkness where you couldn't tell where the land ended and the sky began. Heather asked to go home. Her voice was steady, but uneasy. The boys didn't respond. They kept driving. In those final moments of calm, she still believed she was with friends, boys she'd laughed with at school, hung out with after football games, trusted. But that trust was about to be shattered. The car came to a stop near a remote field not far from the Red River. The doors opened. Heather was told to get out. She hesitated, confused, scared. Then voices started to rise. Accusations? Insults. Jealousy about things she had said, who she had dated, what others thought of her. To them, this wasn't about truth. It was about pride, teenage ego poisoned by alcohol and resentment. Heather tried to reason with them. But reason doesn't work once cruelty takes hold. The night that began as a drive among friends had turned into a nightmare. Witnesses and later confessions would tell fragments of what happened next. Shouting, pushing, panic. Heather pleaded with them to stop. Randy, the youngest, would later say he wanted to intervene, that he didn't want it to go that far. But fear is a dangerous thing. It freezes the good and fuels the bad. Joshua and Curtis took control, louder, angrier. The tension erupted. What happened in those moments was senseless. Heather's voice carried into the night, echoing off the quiet land, the sound of fear, disbelief, and betrayal all at once. And then came silence. The truth, when it finally came out, was unbearable. Heather had been beaten, violated, and humiliated by the people she trusted most. They could have stopped. They could have helped her. But instead they made a choice that crossed every line of humanity. After the violence, Heather was no longer pleading. She was crying quietly, scared, cold, trying to survive. That should have been the end of it, a night that ended in regret, one that could still be forgiven with truth and help. But what happened next turned cruelty into murder. Curtis Gamble, drunk and enraged, reached for a shotgun. Randy said he shouted, "Don't!" But no one listened. 3 shots. One after another. Each echo rolled across the borderlands, swallowed by the night. The trust between friends was gone. What remained was silence, guilt, and a body left alone in the dark. They left her there. A 16-year-old girl, someone's daughter, someone's friend, left lying near the Red River, her life stolen by the same hands that once waved to her in school hallways. As they drove away, the boys told themselves it was done. But crimes like that don't disappear into the dark. They live in the silence of those who witnessed it and the nightmares that follow. Randy would later say he couldn't stop hearing the echoes, the gunshots, the river, her voice. But he didn't come forward, not yet. Fear and shame kept him quiet. The others bragged, tried to twist the story into something else. But the truth was too heavy to hide. In the days that followed, Waurika stayed peaceful on the surface, a town unaware that evil had unfolded in its own backyard. But for the 3 boys, sleep became impossible. Randy confessed later that every sound, a knock on the door, the hum of a car, made him flinch. He knew the secret wouldn't stay buried. Curtis and Joshua acted tough, showing no remorse. They told friends different versions of what happened, laughing it off, pretending it was a mistake. But there are no mistakes when you choose to end a life. And that's where the outrage begins, not just for what they did, but for what they didn't do. They didn't help her. They didn't call for help. They didn't stop it. They treated a human life as something disposable, and in doing so, destroyed their own. Days later, ranchers near the river spotted something in the water, a flash of color where there shouldn't have been any. When authorities arrived, they found Heather Rich's body. It was a discovery that broke Waurika's innocence. The town that once felt safe now felt haunted. Her family's grief was immediate and unrelenting. Her mother's voice cracked as she described Heather's room still as she left it, her makeup on the dresser, her homework half finished. For investigators, the signs were clear. This wasn't an accident. This was murder. And the clues, the bullet casings, the tire tracks, the rumors, all pointed back to people Heather trusted. This wasn't just a crime of violence. It was a crime of betrayal. And that betrayal is what lingers most, not just in her family's hearts, but in the hearts of everyone who believed their community was safe. 3 boys who could have chosen friendship chose power. They could have walked her home. They could have stopped the others. They could have spoken up before or after. But they didn't. That's what makes this story unbearable. It forces us to look at what happens when empathy disappears, when cruelty becomes entertainment, when fear silences conscience. And yet, amid that darkness, truth has a way of finding light. Because secrets like that don't stay buried, not forever. Heather Rich was 16 years old. She had plans, laughter, and dreams that never got to unfold. Her story isn't just about tragedy, it's a warning. About how quickly trust can turn to danger, how easily good people can stay silent when they need to speak. The night her life ended, 3 boys thought they could control fate. But fate has a long memory. Justice was coming, and when it arrived, it exposed not just their guilt, but the fear that drove them to destroy an innocent life. In the next chapter, we follow the investigation, how a single confession cracked the silence, how evidence surfaced, and how the truth, at last, began to rise. Stay tuned for Part 4, The River's Secret. Every secret eventually finds its way to the surface. No matter how deep it's buried, no matter how far you run, truth has a current of its own. And in October 1996, the Red River carried a secret that would change everything for the small town of Waurika, Oklahoma. Before we begin, make sure you're subscribed, because what investigators found along that riverbank revealed not just the crime, but the horrifying betrayal behind it. It was the morning of October 3, 1996, the day after Heather Rich disappeared. 2 ranchers were out checking fences near the Texas border. The air was crisp, quiet, nothing out of the ordinary. Then one of them noticed something unusual near the waterline. At first, it looked like debris, maybe driftwood or a bundle of clothes caught in the reeds. But as they got closer, the shape became clear. It wasn't debris. It was a human body. The men froze. One whispered Heather's name, because even before authorities arrived, they already knew who she was. Word had spread that Heather was missing. And now, she'd been found. Her body was partially submerged, her hair tangled in the reeds. Her clothes were torn. Her face peaceful but lifeless. The scene was quiet, surreal, the kind of stillness that feels wrong, even before the mind accepts what the eyes are seeing. The ranchers called 911. Within minutes, sheriff's deputies, local police, and Texas Rangers were on scene. Detectives quickly secured the area. The Red River marked the border, Oklahoma on one side, Texas on the other, which meant jurisdiction would be complicated. But that didn't matter. A 16-year-old girl had been murdered. Both states wanted answers. Heather's body was carefully removed from the riverbank. Forensic specialists began documenting everything. Bullet casings nearby, tire tracks in the mud, and, most hauntingly, footprints that matched multiple people. At first glance, it looked like she had been shot at close range. 3 wounds. Whoever had done this didn't try to hide it. They just left her there, as if her life meant nothing. The bullets were .22 caliber, small, but deadly. Investigators noted their angle, their spread, and the distance between them. It was clear she had been executed. But why? And who would do it? When news broke that Heather's body had been found, Waurika fell silent. The high school canceled classes. The church bells rang at noon. Parents hugged their children a little tighter. No one could understand how something like this could happen here. Not in their town. Not to a girl like Heather. At first, people clung to denial. Maybe it was someone passing through, a drifter, a stranger. But deep down, most already knew, this felt too personal. Heather had known her killers. Detectives started piecing together her final hours. Phone records. Friends' statements. The last people who saw her alive. That list narrowed quickly. Several students mentioned seeing Heather talking with Joshua Bagwell, a popular but troubled teen. Others mentioned Curtis Gamble, known for his temper. And one name came up again and again, Randy Wood. The three were close friends, always together, always on the edge of trouble. And all three had been seen driving late the night Heather vanished. Investigators visited their homes. At first, the boys acted calm, even helpful. Joshua said he hadn't seen Heather that night. Curtis said the same. Randy, quieter, simply nodded. Their stories matched too perfectly. Too clean. Detectives knew something was off. While the interviews played out, forensic evidence began telling its own story. The bullets recovered from Heather's body were traced to a .22 caliber rifle owned by the Bagwell family. In the mud near the riverbank, investigators found tire impressions. The exact pattern matched Joshua's car. They also found shoe prints consistent with teenage sneakers, at least 3 distinct sets. The evidence was starting to close in, and the lies began to crack. When detectives re-interviewed Randy Wood, they noticed something different: fear. He avoided eye contact, his voice shook. He was only 17, and the guilt was starting to surface. One detective leaned in and said softly, "Randy, we already know what happened. We just need to hear it from you." That was the moment everything began to unravel. At first, Randy hesitated. He said he didn't want to get anyone in trouble. He said it was a mistake. But the detectives pressed. They showed him photos from the river, the bullets, the footprints. Then he broke. His voice cracked as he confessed. Yes, Heather was with them that night. Yes, they had been drinking. Yes, there was an argument. And yes, she had been shot. Randy claimed he didn't pull the trigger. He said Curtis did, using Joshua's rifle. He described the field, the headlights, the sound of the gun. He described how the river swallowed the echo. Detectives listened, silent, the pieces falling perfectly into place. When Randy finished, he buried his face in his hands. The room was still, except for his muffled sobs. That confession shattered the wall of silence. Within hours, warrants were issued. Joshua Bagwell and Curtis Gamble were arrested, charged with murder, kidnapping, and sexual assault. Randy Wood, though part of the group, was treated differently due to his cooperation. The community watched in disbelief as 3 familiar faces, kids from their own school, their own football games, were led away in handcuffs. Parents struggled to explain it. Teachers wept. The town that once prided itself on knowing everyone suddenly realized it hadn't known anyone at all. With the arrests made, detectives dug deeper into the boys' motives. They found jealousy, resentment over Heather's relationships, rumors that spiraled out of control. Curtis, volatile and impulsive, saw Heather as a target. Joshua, proud and manipulative, went along to impress. Randy, afraid to stand up, stayed silent until it was too late. 3 different kinds of guilt, but all equally responsible. Each clue told the same story: this wasn't an accident. It was a decision, a deliberate act of cruelty fueled by arrogance and peer pressure. The Red River had kept Heather's body hidden for less than 24 hours. It took another 24 hours for the truth to surface, because of one boy's conscience and a few pieces of evidence that refused to lie. What the river revealed wasn't just a body. It revealed the dark truth of small-town denial, of youth corrupted by violence, of trust betrayed beyond recognition. The investigation that began beside those muddy waters would lead to convictions, life sentences, and years of reflection on how something so horrific could happen so close to home. Heather's story reminds us that the truth doesn't disappear, it waits. Sometimes in silence. Sometimes beneath the surface. But it always finds a way back. In the next chapter, we'll see how justice took shape, the trials, the community's grief, and the legacy that Heather's family refused to let fade. Stay tuned for Part 5, Justice, Grief, and What Remains. Justice doesn't bring someone back, but it can stop the silence from swallowing their name. For the people of Waurika, Oklahoma, and for Heather Rich's family, the search for justice wasn't just about punishment. It was about meaning. It was about trying to understand how 3 teenage boys who once sat beside Heather in class, could take her life. This is the final chapter of Heather's story, how the truth made its way through a courtroom, how a family stood through unbearable grief, and how a community tried to heal from what it could never forget. When the arrests were announced, Waurika froze. 3 familiar faces, Joshua Bagwell, Curtis Gamble, and Randy Wood, were now charged with first-degree murder. The news spread like wildfire through the small town. Parents stood outside schools whispering in disbelief. Teachers wept in classrooms where empty desks reminded them of what had been lost. People didn't just mourn Heather. They mourned the innocence of their own community. This wasn't supposed to happen here. Not among their own kids. Not in a place where the biggest worry used to be Friday night football. Heather's parents, Dwayne and Gail Rich, faced the unimaginable, seeing the boys who murdered their daughter back in the same courthouse they used to pass every week. There was grief, and there was fury. But through it all, they made a promise. Heather's name would be remembered, and justice would be served. The trials began in early 1997, less than 6 months after Heather's death. Every seat in the courtroom was filled. Journalists lined the back walls. Locals drove in from nearby towns just to watch. The prosecution laid out the story piece by piece. The night Heather was taken, the assault, the 3 gunshots, the drive to the river, and the cold decision to leave her body there. Randy Wood's testimony became the backbone of the case. He told the court what really happened that night, how Heather had begged to go home, how the others ignored her, and how the final decision to pull the trigger came from rage, not reason. As he spoke, the courtroom sat in stunned silence. Randy's words painted a horrifying picture, but they also revealed something else: fear. He had been too afraid to stop them. Too afraid to speak until the weight of it nearly crushed him. His testimony didn't absolve him, but it brought clarity. And for the prosecution, that clarity was everything. When it came time for verdicts, the atmosphere was electric with tension. The courtroom felt smaller that day, like everyone was holding the same breath, waiting for one sound, the gavel. Joshua Bagwell and Curtis Gamble were found guilty of first-degree murder. They were both sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Randy Wood, who had confessed and testified, received a lesser charge, 11 years for second-degree murder. Gasps echoed through the courtroom. Some cried. Others just stared straight ahead. For Heather's parents, there was no celebration, only a deep, tired silence. Justice had been delivered, but their daughter was still gone. Heather's mother later said, "There's no such thing as closure. You just learn to live with the hole that's left." After the trials, the small border town of Waurika wasn't the same. People spoke more quietly. The nights felt longer. The river, once a place for fishing and family picnics, became a symbol of something no one wanted to remember, but couldn't forget. Teachers began holding safety assemblies at schools. Parents became stricter. Curfews tightened. And in nearly every conversation, Heather's name was there, as both a warning and a memory. At the high school, her classmates built a memorial garden, a quiet spot with benches and flowers, where students could sit and think. A simple plaque read, "In memory of Heather Rich, 1980 to 1996. Gone, but never forgotten." Every spring, a candlelight vigil was held near the river. People came from all over the county, some who had never met Heather, others who had known her since kindergarten. They stood in silence, candles flickering in the wind, as her favorite song played softly through a single speaker. It was a reminder that behind the headlines, behind the courtrooms and crime scene tape, there was a girl, young, bright, and full of life, whose dreams had been stolen. Heather's family channeled their pain into purpose. They spoke to schools about teenage violence, peer pressure, and how quickly one bad decision can destroy multiple lives. Her story became part of local educational programs, a warning that cruelty and silence are equally dangerous. One teacher described it best. Heather's life reminds us that the people we trust the most can sometimes be the ones who hurt us the deepest, and that speaking up can save more than one life. Her case was studied by criminology students across the country as an example of juvenile violence and moral collapse, a tragedy born from ego, alcohol, and unchecked rage. But for those who knew Heather personally, she wasn't a case study. She was a daughter, a friend, a girl who laughed too loudly in the hallway and dreamed of becoming a nurse. The murder of Heather Rich wasn't just about one act of violence. It forced an entire community, and even the justice system, to confront how young people can spiral so quickly into destruction when empathy disappears. 3 teenagers made a choice that night. One pulled the trigger. One stood by. One stayed silent. And because of those choices, one innocent girl lost everything. It's a story that still echoes across Oklahoma and Texas, whispered by parents who tell their kids to be careful who they trust, and by teachers who remind their students that every action, every decision, carries weight. The river that once held Heather's body now flows peacefully again, but its memory runs deep. Locals say that on quiet evenings, when the wind moves through the trees, you can still hear the soft sound of water meeting stone, as if the river itself remembers. Heather Rich was 16. She had friends, dreams, and plans, the same as any teenager. Her story is a tragedy, but it's also a lesson. Evil doesn't always wear a stranger's face. Sometimes it looks familiar. Her legacy isn't just about how she died. It's about how her family refused to let her be forgotten, how a small town, shattered by grief, found the courage to speak her name again. In the end, Heather's story isn't only about loss. It's about the strength that comes after, the quiet determination to find meaning when the world offers none. And it's about remembering that justice, no matter how long it takes, begins with truth. Thank you for following Heather's story, for keeping her memory alive through listening, understanding, and never turning away from the truth. If you want to hear more stories like this, stories of resilience, justice, and the human search for meaning, make sure you're subscribed and have notifications turned on. We tell the stories that shouldn't be forgotten.